Intuition is powerful, but it can also let you down. So in this video, I'm going to explain why it's powerful and what you can do when your intuition fails you. Intuition is your ability to do two things. First, it's about your ability to extract a small amount of valuable information from a large and complex situation. And secondly, it's about your ability to make sense of that information. And intuition happens at a level below your conscious awareness. Often, intuition can guide you to good decisions, but it can also let you down. The more experience you have in a particular environment, especially a professional environment, then the more reliable your intuition will become. The whole process of intuition has three stages: perception, understanding, and judgment. You perceive a situation, then you understand it, and then you can evaluate it. The outcome is a decision. We do two things at each stage, which means that the process of intuition, which leads from a situation to a decision, has 6 steps in total. The first stage is perception, and the first step is when your brain selects a small amount of information from everything it perceives to focus on. Most real-world situations are far too complex for us to really understand everything that's going on. So once we've selected a small number of components, the second step is to make sense of them, to spot the patterns among the information and data. For pure intuition, neither selection nor pattern forming happen at the conscious level. We just become aware of them because we're drawing upon our deep experience of situations like it. Your brain has cut through all of the vast amount of data and complexity and really understood what's going on in a process that Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink refers to as thin slicing. Blink is a fantastic book, and I'll put a link to it in the description. Next is understanding, and our brain makes sense of these patterns in 2 steps. The first is when we slot the pattern into a mental model that is well suited to what's going on. Examples include recognizing which stakeholders are more interested in what topics. For example, stakeholders from the finance department are probably going to be more interested in money. When you're facing a computer problem, it is more likely statistically to be a software problem than a hardware problem. And another example is that bosses just don't like to hear bad news. And once we've applied our mental model, the next step is to form an interpretation of the situation. What is going on? Now we're at stage 3, judgment. Our interpretation leads us to be better able to predict what's going to happen next. We use our experience to play the events forward, sometimes with more than one scenario, but often assessing what is most likely to happen. And then, of course, we can assess what we can do best to bend the events towards our preferences. Now we can create a plan of action. Once you have your plan, you can make a decision. How familiar is this process? I suspect it's very familiar and that it happens many times in a day, although you might not even notice it because that's the nature of intuition. It happens at an unconscious level. And it all sounds very well. So how could it possibly go wrong? Well, there are 6 steps in forming an intuition, and therefore there are 6 places where it can go wrong. Firstly, poor selection. Your brain filters out masses of information in order to focus on what it thinks is necessary. But what if it chooses the wrong information? What if it filters out salient, important facts and therefore focuses on the less important, less relevant, peripheral information? A lot of cognitive biases start with this failing. We start with the information that's most recent. We start with the information that is shouting loudest to us. We start with the information that it's easiest to understand or that fits with our preconceptions, confirming our biases. Secondly, our brains are good at pattern forming, but what if they form the wrong pattern? In fact, they are so good at forming patterns that sometimes we see a pattern in truly random data. I don't believe in coincidences, but they do happen. Sometimes we spot patterns that are just not real, and often that's because we've selected too little data. Because of course, if you put 2 dots on a sheet of paper, there's always a straight line between them. Small data sets produce too many random coincidences, and then they start to look like a pattern that doesn't exist, or the wrong pattern. The way to check whether there really is a pattern is to see if the same pattern persists when you acquire more data and you double the amount of data and you triple it. If more data confirms the pattern, then you have a stronger reason to believe it. But if data starts to shift the pattern, then you know it was wrong. The third thing that can go wrong is you apply the wrong mental model to the pattern that you found. We learn all sorts of rules of thumb. And even if the rule of thumb that you've chosen is correct, it might be the wrong rule of thumb for the situation. This often happens when we're working outside the arena of our deep experience, and therefore we try to apply a mental model or a rule of thumb from our experience to a situation for which it isn't truly appropriate. Always ask yourself, where does this mental model work and where does it break down? Because it is too seductive to focus only on where the model works well. But even with the right mental model, you can interpret its implications incorrectly. So always ask yourself, what other interpretations could I apply when I consider the patterns that I've observed and the mental model I've used? Then look for tests to determine whether your mental model works and your interpretation is solid as you introduce new facts, new evidence, new data to the pattern. Fifth, even with the right interpretation, you might still make the wrong prediction about what's going to happen in the future. The reason for this is because predictions rely upon assumptions. So you need to test your assumptions and check your predictions through a number of methods. First, always list out the assumptions that you're making, particularly the implicit assumptions that you're not consciously aware of. Next, determine the impact that each of these assumptions has on the outcomes you're predicting. Then, change your assumptions. This is scenario analysis. Change your assumptions to the most adverse assumptions that you could make that are still broadly plausible. Test your predictions to the breaking point. Review the new predictions you get with the tougher assumptions, and if you get broadly the same prediction, then you can feel more confident. If you get a radically different prediction, then you know that your assumption set and therefore the predictions you are making from it are dangerous. And finally, even if you get everything right and you predict the future accurately, you can still go wrong if you make a bad plan to base your decision upon. What if your plan fails to properly address the scenario that you've got? What if your plan addresses a more optimistic scenario? What if it doesn't have enough contingency built into it? What if you miss something out of your plan? Once again, you need to test and test again. And the best way to test a plan is to put it away for a while and only review it when you've had some time away from it and you can look at it with fresh eyes. Better still, get some genuinely fresh eyes and ask someone else to look at your plan and review it for you. But there is one last failure that I have seen with many organizations and a number of my clients. You see, You've thought very carefully about the patterns you're observing, you've interpreted them properly, and you've made accurate predictions, and you've created a great, solid, robust plan to address the situation. And what does senior management do? Nothing. Not deciding often feels safe. It feels comfortable. If we don't make a decision, we can't get it wrong. But there is a huge risk in deferring or refusing to make a decision. But that is taking me into politics, and I think we've got enough to stop here. So, which of these points of intuition failure ring a bell with you? And what will you do next time to make your decisions more robust? Please do give a thumbs up if you like this video. I'll be creating loads more great project management content for you, so please do subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of it. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.